Welcome to the Colorado Climate Retreat, or CCR. We've got a full schedule for today, so I'm just going to open with some brief kind of orienting remarks and then turn it over to our speakers. So I just want to say a little bit about sort of how I've been thinking and worrying about some of these issues. And I take it in this audience, we probably don't need to convince people that climate change is a real thing and that maybe we should be trying to address it in some way. But I do want to just take a moment to kind of reflect on the human costs of extreme weather events, right? Because I think sometimes when we talk about these slight changes in temperature, it's a little abstract, and granted there's some noise in translating that into the actual human consequences, but if I can channel my inner Al Gore, like people are dying because of these extreme weather events, whether it's heat waves or flooding. Obviously we've had our own floods, but in other areas of the world the consequences are even more severe. If you've stepped outside, like this morning, you might have noticed the haze actually from these massive wildfires all across the western United States and Canada that are being blown into the region. And it's a little inconvenient maybe for most of us, but actually there are lots of people with compromised respiratory systems, cardiovascular issues, who will die because of the increased smoke. This is not South Asia, this is Houston, which of course yields these sort of apocalyptic images. And this weekend, there's another hurricane barreling toward the United States. So the consequences obviously are real and immediate and really devastating. And I think for many of us, underlying our work and our thinking about these issues is this kind of challenge. If we see this happening, why are we failing to take actions to mitigate climate change and to adapt to climate change? And the different speakers today are going to talk about this from different perspectives. I just want to kind of highlight two partial answers that I think are as much incomplete as they are informative. And so the first, when we consider why are we failing to address climate change, I think for many of us we're like, because of Republicans, that's why. And one of the things that David and Phil and I have been kind of thinking about in the past couple of years is how this is very much a partial explanation. That in fact, if you ask Republicans, do they believe in climate change? Most of them do believe in climate change. They recognize it as a genuine occurrence and serious threat. So these are some results that David may or may not show you another version of in a few minutes. This comes from a nationally representative-ish survey that we conducted a few years ago. We asked people some questions about how much they agree that climate change is happening, that it's caused by humans, that it's posing a threat to human well-being. The blue kind of density plot are the Democrats, purple are independents, red are Republicans. Clearly there are partisan differences here. I don't want to suggest that there are no partisan differences, but it also is the case that most Republicans believe in climate change, believe that it's caused by humans, and believe that it's posing a threat to humans. We found exactly the same thing in 2016, in October and November, right before the election. Another representative sample, same pattern of results. Earlier this week, my daughter, who's in high school, was working on a research project where she's analyzing the American National Election Study data and looking at Democrats and Republicans who voted for Clinton and Trump. And it turns out that in the survey there's this question about do you believe that climate change is probably happening or probably not happening. So the green is probably it is happening, the brown is probably not happening. And across all of these groups, whether Democrat or Republican, whether voting for Clinton or voting for Trump, even though there are these partisan differences, the vast majority believe that climate change is probably happening. And this is in some ways shocking, right? Even as many of these people were voting for a president who tweeted that climate change is an expensive hoax, they nevertheless believe that it's real and something that is harmful and needs to be addressed. So part of the answer is there are these partisan differences, but that answer is obviously very incomplete. Another kind of observation that I think you'll see a number of the speakers touch on today is that believing in climate change really is not enough. So in one of the surveys I was briefly summarizing a few minutes ago, we also asked people how much they supported a carbon pricing policy, and this is a scatter plot just with different colors representing Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. The regression line there is the estimate of how much their belief in climate change predicts support for the policy, and yes, the more you believe in climate change, the more you support carbon pricing policy, but there's huge variability here, and in particular there are a lot of people who believe strongly in climate change, but they don't support a carbon pricing policy. And so understanding that gap between belief and behavior is, I think, a real challenge for us to grapple with. A few years ago, Andrew Revkin had this great op-ed in the New York Times titled An Inconvenient Mind, and he wrote, "A large part of the climate challenge is not out in the world of eroding glaciers and limited energy choices, but inside the human mind." At the time, he was really talking about the denial of climate change, but I think we'll see it's much more complicated than just denying climate change. There are many, many other issues that stand in the way of addressing climate change. And I think we have to recognize that the individual psychology is really a small part of this overall puzzle. So this is a figure from a paper that Adam Pearson and John Schultz wrote. They'll be presenting later today, and it sort of recognizes that the individual, the psychology of the individual, is really a small part of this much broader, complex system that involves groups, pressures within the groups, pressures between groups, social, political, economic systems, moneyed interests. Psychology is not the only answer, but it's an important part of the answer because, of course, everything that involves humans involves individual psychology. So part of what we're trying to do today is to assemble a team of interdisciplinary researchers from the arts and across the social behavioral sciences to address different answers to this question of how can we think about addressing climate change and mitigating its consequences. So you all have seen this before, but we have 4 different collections of presentations with a good variability within each of these groups. I won't dwell on any of this longer because I want to move ahead. And before we get started with the main talks, I want to be sure to extend, whoops, I didn't mean to end that, to extend our special thanks to, first of all, Alicia Siegel, who's in the back of the room. She's done lots of coordination and lots of detail. Attention to detail that I don't have, which is fantastic. And also with attention to detail that I am lacking, Jennifer Cole, who's in the front of the room. Presenting later this afternoon. And then the National Science Foundation Decision Risk and Management Science Program allowed us to use some remaining funds in a grant to support this conference. So now I'm going to end and set up